Everyone is calling this the most competitive law school cycle in history, and they're only half right. Of course, there are more applicants, higher LSAT medians, and less room for error, but behind closed doors, law schools are dealing with a very different problem. It's not about rankings or prestige, it's about money. And once you understand why money is suddenly a problem for law schools, that changes your entire law school admissions strategy. Because this cycle and the next several may become more and more negotiable over time. Because for decades, law school tuition has been climbing steadily. And what made it survivable for law schools was federal loans. As long as students could borrow whatever they needed, schools could raise tuition and let the future you deal with the consequences. But that system only works when federal borrowing feels unlimited. And today in 2026, it no longer does. Because when you look at the cost of attendance, tuition plus living expenses at many top schools is now pushing right up against or even past what federal loans can comfortably cover. This is due to the elimination of the Grad PLUS loans starting in July of this year, which will affect everybody starting law school this fall and beyond. And once the federal Grad PLUS loans are eliminated, students will face three options. One is private loans, another is family money, and the third option is choosing a cheaper law school. And that last option, you having an alternative to paying a high sticker price tuition, that fundamentally changes the dynamics of admissions. Because for years, admissions followed a pretty simple rule. If school A was ranked higher than school B and both admitted the same student, school A usually won. In other words, your typical applicant would go to the best law school they got accepted to. But rankings are not going to pay your loan bills. Net tuition does. So at that point, sticker price becomes almost meaningless. What matters is what you actually pay after scholarships. And that number varies wildly even between similarly ranked schools. And when the debt starts to feel real, students stop choosing the better ranked school and start choosing the one with less painful debt associated. So inside admissions offices right now, officers are quietly panicking over the coming elimination of the federal Grad PLUS loans. Now, if a school ranked 25 historically lost most head-to-head competition with schools ranked 15 through 20, that was normal. But what if that lower ranked school could flip just a couple of those outcomes by reallocating scholarship money? If they can win in the majority of head-to-head competitions between other schools, it stabilizes their yield, it protects their medians, and it secures that sweet, sweet tuition revenue. That's why merit aid becomes a defensive tool for lower-ranked law schools. And that's why the LSAT matters most than most applicants realize, because your LSAT score is a pricing signal. Schools use LSAT scores to decide how expensive it would be for them to lose you to a competitor law school. And if your LSAT score helps them protect their medians, you carry financial weight, and they are increasingly likely to give you merit aid to incentivize you or attract you to choose their school over another one. That's why two applicants who both got accepted can receive very different financial aid offers. So imagine, for example, there's a student who gets into two relatively similarly ranked law schools. One is ranked slightly higher, and the other is ranked slightly lower, but the lower ranked school is significantly cheaper. When you could easily take out loans, the higher ranked school would win. But this cycle, schools are seeing more students choose the cheaper option. And that's happening more often than even they themselves would have expected. Now, schools care a lot about yield. Yield is the percentage of admitted students who actually enroll. When schools lose strong candidates late in the cycle, that calls their entire model into question. And schools can't just take in more students to compensate, because over-enrollment or offering admission to too many students, that can create real problems with student-faculty ratio, employment outcomes, or whether the school is still within ABA compliance. And so instead of radically changing class size, schools change their pricing by giving out scholarships. That's why money is the ultimate lever for the schools. And so for you as an applicant, that's where your strategy comes into play. Because if you apply broadly to a large range of schools and you can get multiple offers, especially offers with meaningful financial differences, you have the advantageous position, you have leverage because you represent a real internal debate for the school. Admissions will be asking themselves, are we about to lose this student to a competitor school because of money? When the answer might be yes, they might just give you more money. Of course, this does not mean every school is about to hand out full rides to every comer. There are real financial constraints, of course. Some schools will look to cut costs, some will increase their class sizes a bit, and some will just struggle financially if they can't get enough students paying full price. But what is changing is how aggressively schools protect their position, especially around their medians. If your LSAT and GPA are above a school's median, that makes you competitive. It makes you a strategic asset for the school. Now, if you've already applied, you might have noticed that decisions are dragging. This cycle is moving incredibly slowly, and that's not by accident. It's because early applicant numbers spiked. Applicant numbers are up significantly over the past 2 years, as much as 50%. And so schools are waiting and watching because they want to preserve flexibility. And that makes wait lists more important than usual. And that's where money conversations get really serious. That's where negotiation comes into play. Now, one of the biggest factors working behind the scenes on top of all this is the coming demographic cliff, meaning there are fewer people in the age range who are going to college, which means fewer college graduates, which means fewer law school applicants coming up in the next couple of years, which means that schools are going to need you more than you need them. They have more competition over a limited number of applicants as we approach 2030, which is when the demographic cliff really kicks into play. And so law schools are preparing early by admitting more students. They want to build up their nest egg of tuition if they are tuition reliant for their operations. And if you add into this, of course, legal hiring uncertainty, artificial intelligence, and it becomes harder for schools to sell you on taking on massive debt, which means schools are going to be more likely to give out financial aid. Now, most applicants, unfortunately, are still playing the old game where they treat the first offer as the final offer. They don't realize they can negotiate, or if they do negotiate, they do so without leverage, or they obsess over rankings without looking at debt over time. And so the real shift you've got to understand is to recognize that you are in a desirable position as an attractive law school candidate. And so it's about who's willing to pay you the most money to keep you and get you to choose their school. It's not about getting in, it's about the pricing. How much are you going to pay for your JD? And of course, the best way to maximize your position as a competitive applicant to get as much scholarship money as possible is by getting the strongest possible LSAT score. The higher your LSAT score is above the median of the school you are applying to, the more scholarship money you can get. In many cases, you can get a full ride.